There we go. I'll do that for right now, just so that everybody can also see the moderator. Okay. Live streaming is up. Perfect.
Yay.
Thank you for everybody for coming to today's session. We will get started in about 2 minutes. As always, I will do some quick housekeeping for asking our speaker to share some wonderful information with us. As you're coming in, if you want to let us know where you are hailing from, that would be great. I'm from Santa Clara, California. It's going to be maybe 90 degrees today with no AC, so that's going to be wonderful. Uh, I'm the the life sciences librarian, Ashley, from Santa Clara University. But I always joke with my coworker, who is also, we consider ourselves like the STEM librarian because she's the applied sciences librarian, and I'm like, I'm the STEM. I'm not the TEM, so we always joke about that. Alrighty. Okay, so we are right at the 10 o'clock time, or at least 10 o'clock in California time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Is that okay with you, Quincy?
That's okay with me.
Perfect. All right. So good morning or afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. My name is Anna Yang, and I am the moderator for today's session titled, Are We Ghosts in the Machine? AI, Agency, and the Future of Libraries. So before we get started, just a few reminders, which I'm sure you have been just hearing throughout the whole entire conference. I'm going to share some links in just a few seconds, just a few things around code of conduct that we will adhere to for today's conference. And then also just if you are experiencing any type of like misconduct or any kind of issues around conduct, please email the Gale Conference Support Team. We will try our very best to help you and answer any questions. Just a great group of people here, okay? Please be sure that your microphone is muted. And we are actually saving all of our questions until the end of the presentation for Quincy. So feel free to post that in the Q&A. You can post that in the chat as well, and I'll do my very best to keep track of those, but Q&A is probably the best for me. um, And then also just to remind everybody that today's session is being recorded and it is live streamed. So you will have access to the recording afterwards as well. You can also enable captions by clicking the show captions button at the bottom of the screen. And those are just some technical details for you all. So it is my pleasure to introduce Quincy McCrary, liaison librarian to the Colleges of Medicine and Pharmacy at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Trained in the health sciences, Quincy's research interest lies in medical anthropology, agency, technology, and learning, and the cultural consequences of changing information systems. Please join me in welcoming Quincy.
Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. And welcome to the third day of Gale. I hope that you've been attending a bunch of other great papers and have enjoyed yourself, and that you're going to look forward to the rest of the conference. Now, today I thought I would come and talk a bit about a paper that I wrote over the last couple of years and some research that I'm doing now. But I wanted to start like looking back at as far back as I could to try to find somebody who had a good statement about agency. So I thought Epictetus, one of my favorite Stoic philosophers who lived from about the year 50 to 135, um, he was challenged in his life. He broke his leg when he was a young man and lived the rest of his life disabled as he was. But he was a pretty late entry in Stoic philosophy and a really kind of interesting person. So if you're interested, Epictetus, go and check him out. So he is said to have written, "It is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them. Many things that are judged as upsetting," this is my words, my interpretation, I think. Many things that are judged as upsetting should really not be. When you really think about what they are, they're often not as bad as they appear. So some of you remember when Google first came into the academic library, and we certainly were challenged by that and we're very concerned by it. And I think in many ways, we're dealing with those same issues today. So Anna was nice enough to give a great introduction. For me, my name is Quincy McCrary, and I work at UIC. But my background is in anthropology. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I've studied for some time now the cultural consequences of changing information systems. And boy, do we have a changing information system happening today. So I work primarily in systematic reviews. I do a fair amount of instruction. I still teach anthropology. I work in the big databases every day, the big medicine databases every day. And today I thought I would touch a bit on that notion of agency that I was just discussing. So the question, are we ghosts in the machine, is something we'll try to answer through the course of this lecture. From my research, humans have always been concerned that the machine was thinking, that there is a soul or something like a mind could manifest, evolve, or simply become resident in a machine. From gremlins to elves to ghosts, the mind in the machine. Have we become that ghost, a phantom presence viewing and rarely directing the machine? The question for the next 40 minutes or so is actually this. As vendors embed AI into those platforms we license, whose research really is it? The students, or what I will describe as a network? It depends entirely on how we design and govern the human AI relationship, and librarians are really well positioned to help shape that response. So in some ways, this is both a conceptual paper, but also a call to action. Well, as I mentioned, this is a conceptual paper. It's not an empirical study. I'm doing those studies now. The data is really interesting. The goal then was to give the field a shared vocabulary for something that we can all see happening, but at the time I couldn't really describe. While completing graduate work in anthropology, actually here in Lawrence, Kansas, I worked with a brilliant anthropologist by the name of F. Allen Hansen, who really got me thinking about human agency. That's the idea that people make decisions that influence the world around them. When I noticed that a machine that we built is really beginning to make decisions for us in a very pronounced way, I began to question its influence on our ability to make decisions that impact the world around us, meaning I began to question its influence on our agency. So since I'm also a practicing librarian, I looked at information seeking. First, I looked at the technology, then at a particular set of theories that seemed to fit. I noticed agency is redistributed into this complex network. I thought about it practically, and I developed some recommendations. So that's what we're going to explore today. The machinery, which, gosh, I'm sure you've spent a lot of time on this in the last couple of days, so I'll make that brief. The theory, which I think is really interesting, what he originally began saying, describing as extended agency, that we extend our agency through tools to affect the world around us. Now he's beginning to really talk about composite agency, how agency and AI is a cognitive extender of our cognition. Redistribution, how agency shifts, and outcomes. I want to describe some students' scenarios, right? And then a path forward for us. Artificial intelligence is changing the landscape of academic research, and particularly within libraries. This transformation is not always visible to students, nor is it always subject to institutional oversight. And I know we've been talking about this a lot today, so we'll continue to do so a little bit. As AI tools are embedded into familiar library databases, students are increasingly engaging with these tools without recognizing how their research process is being reshaped. They are experiencing what Jonathan Crary described as the relegation of humans as working and living beings to the periphery of technological systems. That really caught my eye when I first read it. I've been teaching Wallerstein's world system theory, and the idea that there is a segment redistribution of labor globally as a result of the structures of capitalism, essentially. And so I saw this and I thought, this really fits what I'm talking about. Where did he come up with these ideas? I would say that today's students face a more subtle challenge. They are becoming ghosts in the machine of their own cognition and agency, which is bound to AI systems that are transforming what it means to research and learn. Consider then a pre-med student reading an AI-generated drug monograph, or a psychology student whose literature search is steered by relevance algorithms. They're doing research on a trusted academic platform while their agency is being redistributed between their intentions and systems that they can't see, may not understand, often cannot control. These tools are invisible, sometimes unreviewed, or even politically or economically motivated. And this results in a redistribution of student agency, a change that actually alters the American university system's emphasis on individualism and autonomy. Information literacy instruction norms assume that students control search strategy, right? They control source evaluation, and certainly that they control synthesis. Because those practices are how critical thinking and intellectual independence are taught. If the machine takes over those silently, then that model no longer functions in the same way, and we need to rethink it. Now, this stuff you've gotten, I'm sure, a lot about today, right? So 3 different tools that we're talking about, both machine learning and then large language models are built off of that, and then generative AI. As you probably know by now, machine learning algorithms drive predictive search features by analyzing patterns. For example, when a researcher searches for climate policy, the system may suggest related concepts such as carbon pricing or renewable energy transitions. These concepts are the result of collecting, combining, and summarizing individual data, and we know that there can be problems with this. The functionality can accelerate discovery by emphasizing interdisciplinary connections. At the same time, obviously, it introduce risks like the amplification of dominant or algorithmically favored narratives, and we know this is the case. The data is showing it to us. Large language models are a little bit more advanced, built on machine learning architectures. They're trained on extensive collections of text, sometimes legally, sometimes not. A student might use a large language model powered tool to get a summary of a complex scholarly article. The systems are known to fabricate citations. I'm sure we've known about this now, and you've seen all these cases. Large language models have generated nonsensical terms that have made it into the literature. If you haven't seen this yet, Google vegetative electron microscopy, vegetative electron microscopy, and you'll find that it has appeared in the published literature. Keep digging a little bit more, and you'll find a couple of images that made it past peer review. One of them about a rat, which is a little disturbing, and I'm sure you can find that if you feel so inclined. Don't blame me if it pops up in your search results. Well, I guess you can. Gen AI systems frequently use large language models as their core engine to generate new stuff, right? New synthetic content. Guided by user's prompt, they can author detailed reports. However, tools that may identify what it thinks is a foundational document and emerge in themes without the user needing to read the individual articles, and I think this is problematic in medicine particularly. These tools can dramatically accelerate research workflows, there's no doubt about this. But they may also obscure the provenance of information and reduce engagement with original sources. AI in your A to Z list. While not every library has adopted every feature I'm describing here, I think most of us now encounter AI tools daily. Students are presented with AI assistants embedded in trusted library resources, sometimes without even knowing that they are, right? I'm sure this is happening to all of you right now if you're using 365, which most of us do, and they embedded Copilot into it, as they did for us. All of a sudden, Copilot is trying to write your paper right inside of Word, right? It's trying to write your email right inside of Outlook. There's various different problems with that, various different efficiency increases that have occurred as a result of that. But let's walk through a couple of these tools and we can see what they're doing here. So AI Insights from EBSCO summarizes full text into a few key points, supports AI-assisted natural language searches across host and discovery. Funny though, in the last couple of months, and you'll see this if you go into an EBSCO database right now, they changed the language from natural language search, which is something that we in libraries have been trying to achieve for a long, long time. But what they're doing isn't actually the kind of natural language searching that we were attempting to do before. They're using AI-assisted searching, which means they're processing the search through a large language model. While I'm glad they are being forthright, I do wonder what the tool is actually doing and how forthright they've been. Actually, EBSCO is one of the better publishers that's showing us what they're doing. So ProQuest Research Assistant extracts takeaways, proposes directions. Maybe you've seen this one. Scopus AI, clustering, generative document summaries. Clinical Key AI puts generative clinical decision support inside of a medical content platform. Some issues there we've seen, but nevertheless, we know that most of those issues can be addressed. Perhaps you've worked in the medical arena, you're familiar with UpToDate one way or another. You know that UpToDate AI now is being put inside of Epic. So that's the place where we hold all of our HPI and where essentially patient records are, right? Or the problems that we're seeing with open evidence, which I think is a great tool. But again, I'm not sure that it democratizes access to differential diagnosis tools as they hoped it would. Primo and Summon use retrieval augmented generation. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that this last couple of days, but kind of the new way we're describing what these generative AI tools are doing. Web of Science has its own research assistant. The point about all this, obviously, is there are increasingly core components of paid environments, not optional add-ons, and phrases like trusted content powered by responsible AI, which is actually used by Elsevier to promote clinical key. I actually saw this occur directly within the environment where the database is being presented in my location. It popped up and it said, this is trusted content powered by responsible AI. You want to use clinical key AI. When I went to the collections manager and asked if they knew that clinical key AI was being advertised directly to our students through the database's interface, they said they did not. So in the end, the library endorses these tools, whether we intend it to or not. So these numbers are a little bit behind, right? I'm sure that they've changed a bit since last year's survey. Hopefully we'll update them next year. But 92% of students engage with AI tools. Only 36% have received formal guidance. So how can that happen? We're behind. There's never reasons why we're behind, but nevertheless, we're behind. Meanwhile, 45% of educators globally and about 52% of students in the US report no training at all on AI tool use. So the composite networks we'll talk about in the course of this presentation are being formed right now at scale, mostly by people who have never been taught how they work. These tools have been described as only the very best visions of what they can do, right? The very best possible results of what these tools can do. Now, users are becoming aware of the flaws. Users are becoming aware of the environmental impacts. Yet they're still being adopted at an astounding rate. I described it as AI creep in my formal literature over the last few years, but I think it's even more than that. As the early critics of capitalist markets explained to us, though, humans will enter into unequal exchange relationships if they can imagine a future profit or return. I think we're still at that stage with the AI tools I'm describing. Now, I'm sure that you've been talking about this either at this conference or in other spaces, but I'll talk about it a little bit because it directly relates to what I'm proposing. The integration of AI into academic libraries is often championed for the benefits of efficiency, primarily efficiency and access. AI tools do offer powerful advantages, primarily through cognitive offloading. There are really good reasons and really poor reasons why this is the case. They can streamline literature searches, accelerate systematic reviews, and uncover connections. They actually do thematic analysis fairly well. By automating repetitive tasks, such as search execution and summarizing complex text, these tools are, proponents argue, releasing resources which otherwise would be necessary to actively hold information in short-term representations. This freed capacity then could be reallocated to higher order thinking and synthetic thinking, and synthetic thinking. For novice researchers or those facing information overload, as many of us are, AI can function as a scaffold, democratizing access to complex scholarly landscapes and expanding their capacity for intellectual work. But the convenience of AI-assisted research comes with a significant risk of cognitive atrophy, where the development of students' own independent skills is diminished, and this is being measured. Frequent, and I'd be happy to share the research that I've done and others to show this. Frequent and uncritical reliance on AI tools appears to undermine the development of necessary skills by reducing cognitive engagement and promoting passive learning behaviors. This is really important, and this is the kind of the reason why I started doing this research. As Kamina and et al. 2025 note, reliance on AI systems can lead to a passive approach and diminish activation of critical thinking skills when the person later performs those tasks alone, with users often bypassing the deeper engagement with material, leading to skill atrophy in tasks like brainstorming and problem solving. We've already had a hard enough time getting our students to brainstorm and to problem solve and to summarize, and now we're giving them a tool to do it for them, which can be fine, don't get me wrong. But we also need to learn how to address it. So this quote here on the screen is not a librarian or an ethicist worrying on students' behalf. This is an engineering student from Day's 2025 study explaining to the group why to use AI. The conversation itself is the learning. The student here is distinguishing between the product of research and the process of research, and recognizing that the process is where the skill develops. The journey is the prize, right? The intuition is exactly that aha moment that most of us have had at some point in the research process. In many ways, this is the core of modern information literacy training, right? Being able to think critically about the information you are encountering will help you to evaluate the quality of that information. So incredibly important. And I think that the quote here does a good job of articulating the stakes, and our frameworks are slowly catching up to them. Now let's talk a little about agency now. And here I'll spend a little bit more time on my anthropology hat side and talk a bit about what human agency is and why it's important. Human agency then refers to the ability of individuals or groups to make decisions, exercise control, and interpret the world around them. I usually use this metaphor when I'm teaching this in anthropology, but consider the stage. An actor is given lines. They have the agency to go on the stage and give their lines or choose not to, right? If they choose not to, there will be implications. So that ethical component of this certainly is there. And we talk about that in philosophy, less so in anthropology. We're really talking about the ability for ourselves to make changes that affect the world around us. In the context of academic research, my work defines individual agency as the student's capacity to act as the primary author and arbiter of their own knowledge building process. And this view aligns with the psychological model of agency, which emphasizes intentionality and self-regulation and is rooted in an educational philosophy where learning is an active process of reflective inquiry. And again, not a passive activity. In practice, this individual agency manifests as the capacity for intentional, self-directed action and judgment throughout the research process, encompassing the formation of authentic research questions, the anonymous navigation of information systems, the evaluations of sources, and most importantly, the independent synthesis of information into original arguments, right? That's what we're trying to teach our students to do. So F.A. Allen Hansen, he developed a theory of composite agency. It began as noted this notion that we're extending our agency into our tools, and that agency is not solely the property of the individual. And this was pretty groundbreaking at the time he began to articulate it. Most actions were undertaken by subjects that extend beyond the human individual to include other human beings and any number of kind of non-human entities. So in the new Superorganic, lovely read, go ahead and read it. Certainly an extension of the Superorganic, which emerged in the 1970s. Anthropologists like Geertz, for example, who were symbolic anthropologists, began to convey this notion. So the Marxists as well. Hansen illustrated this concept through an analysis of legal research methods and tools. So from manually indexing systems to algorithmically driven platforms like Lexis and Westlaw, these systems then form a temporary task-specific network in which human and non-human actors co-author outcomes, right? That's a really interesting and fascinating way to think about agency, in my view at least. Agency that is distributed across the system, with algorithms actively shaping access, organization, and interpretation of information. In the context of academic research, students' actions are shaped not only by their intentions, but also by the AI systems embedded in library databases. When students use AI tools, whether predictive search algorithms or generative summary features, their research outcomes are co-authored then by those systems. And what that means, I think we're still kind of struggling with, right? I mean, shoot, we've only just recently been able to cite data that's coming from a large language model, and the models are changing so rapidly, you could cite one and it's gone by the next time the paper is read. Okay, so what about cognitive extensions? We have this idea of agency. We can see that we're extending our agency through our tools. What about AI as a way of extending our mind, right? Other authors are obviously writing on this as well. Hernandez, Orlado, and Ward broadly describe AI as a cognitive extender. The authors began by contrasting anonymous AI systems, say self-driving cars, automated or diagnostic systems, with interactive coupled systems such as translation tools, or more recently, of course, AI assistants. While anonymous AI acts independently, AI extenders work with humans, forming hybrid cognitive systems, those networks I'm talking about. AI systems do more than just assist, they actively augment functions like memory and decision making. They become part of the student's own cognitive process. So together, these frameworks provide a way to examine how AI systems redistribute agency and reshape cognition. Composite agency theory reveals how students become part of the human AI networks that co-author research outcomes. The AI extender framework illuminates the various consequences of this network. Students' agency can diminish, original intention become residual within a system they don't control. Composite agency then gives us that structural picture. The student is one node in a network that co-authors outcomes. The extender framework gives a cognitive picture. The network is not external scaffolding, rather it is folded into the student's own thinking. Together, they explain both the mechanism and the stakes. The risk is that students' agency diminishes to a spectral presence, an original intention that persists only as a residual force in a system that they do not direct. The intention still haunts the process, but it no longer steers it. The ghost is watching the machine. Let's look a little bit closer at the process. So I'm going to talk about query formation, source selection, synthesis, and verification, right? As an anthropologist, my interest in this obviously emerged as I began to look at information seeking through the lens of an anthropologist and through the view of agency. So query formation, the student still initiates the query, but autocomplete and concept suggestion pre-populate the conceptual space before the first result even appears. So agency is composite from the very onset. 2 letters in, and it's already given you possible autocomplete suggestions. Source selection, the student actively chooses, but only from a list the algorithm has already filtered and ranked by citation metrics, popularity, and engagement, other than any other, in a perfect world, neutral representation of the literature. And I think that our organization structures have attempted to do this through the years. How well we create a neutral representation of the literature, of course, can be challenged. Lastly, or sorry, not lastly, synthesis. The summarize button decides relevance, context, and structural narrative structure. Shirbakov, actually, I don't have the year there, so I can give that to you later. Another source that I think is really important talking about synthesis. And his colleagues, or their colleagues, note this accelerates review but demands human oversight. And boy, isn't that the catchphrase of the month, the human in the loop, right? And without it, the student becomes a consumer of AI-authored narratives rather than narratives that the original author intended, sometimes without enough truth to the original intention of the author. Lastly, verification, I think the place that librarians can offer the most assistance. Outputs can arrive detached from attributable sources, stripping the student of the ability to check claims or access credibility. Now, of course, this is getting better. We're seeing more and more large language models are including attributable sources, but sometimes they're made up, right? Of course, our ability to choose is never eliminated. Really, in many ways, it's just redistributed. Sorry about that. I just moved a chat feature over. The resistance, well, let's step back a couple seconds. Humans are resilient. Humans are resilient. And we're resisting this redistribution of our agency, students in particular. But this resistance should not be interpreted as a rejection of technology, but rather a conscious effort by students to reconfigure the composite network of human AI interaction. First, interrogation through prompt engineering. Again, librarians are really good at this. Students are really good at this. If we can combine, we can make great prompts, right? Which is really just search phrases, right? So we're really good at this. We need to embrace that. Interrogation through prompt engineering. Students iteratively probe the system, testing what it knows, where it fails, which converts the AI from an oracle to a dialectical partner that can be questioned and challenged. And that's really important, right? The literature increasingly treats this skill as essential for meaningful rather than dependent generative AI use. Strategic opting out, and this you'd be surprised at how often this is being discussed in the literature today. Students decline AI for particular cognitive tasks, specifically to protect skill development. They're already recognizing this, naming de-skilling and diminished accomplishment as their primary reasons. Remember the engineering student from earlier? Externalizing cognitive tasks boosts immediate performance, but costs long-term memory. At least that's what the evidence is showing right now. So these resistances could keep the student as the directing mode of the network. The capacity for such strategic resistance is not equally distributed across my problem here for a second, just a second here. I don't know what just happened, but my PowerPoint seems to have stopped. I need to switch it back. Excuse me for a moment here. Okay. However, the capacity for such strategic resistance is not equitably distributed across the student population, raising questions of educational justice. The ability to confidently critique AI outputs or voluntarily opt out of an efficiency-enhancing tool assumes a foundation of existing information literacy skills and time resources. Students who are already struggling, or who lack institutional support may feel compelled to use AI tools out of necessity, even while recognizing its potential drawbacks. Remember that unequal exchange relationship I was talking about earlier. What may be a strategic choice for some may end up being a structural necessity for others. That makes AI integration an educational justice issue, just like access to the net once was, an issue that librarians are particularly well suited to address. So I really do hope that we get to do that as we talk more and more about helping students to access these models, access these tools. Our universities have to be able to provide them, and they're beginning to. But for a while there, it was direct marketing from the providers to our students, and we've got to mediate that. So in the article that I'm basing this on, I developed a composite undergraduate nursing student who I named Mary after my mom's middle name. They are reviewing adolescent anxiety interventions through the library's discovery layer. Session 1 is the passive path. This is what is projected as the primary path, right? This is what the systems want you to do, is be passive with it. And certainly, that's the nature of the way that we develop these kinds of systems. So she types her query, which is the last purely individual act of the system. The machine learning algorithm parses it against historical search patterns, click-through data, metrics, etc. And it hands her a curated list of the system's assumptions, built on the system's assumptions about relevance. She clicks a top-ranked item, her behavioral feed then begins the ranking loop, and this is genuinely recursive, and this is redistribution. When she notices the summarize button and begins consuming large language model overviews, and remember, we've learned in the last 6 months or so that the snippet is often only pulled from the abstract. So it's not even looking at the full text, it's only looking at the abstract, and then it's developing a snippet of that based purely on, of course, predictive algorithms, right? Not any type of engagement directly with the literature. Instead of full text, she's letting the system decide emphasis, omission, and framing, decisions that traditionally belong to the researcher. As a medical librarian, I'm extremely concerned about this. We want to teach our physicians to be critical, right? So this is concerning to me. Nothing, or was when I began to do this research. Nothing here is misconduct, though. This is the tool working as it's designed. This is what it wants the users to do, what they want the users to do within the tool. Same student, same query, same platform. Marie now knows the algorithm ranks, because hopefully someone has taught her, or she's learned on her own, however she got to that knowledge. But she's beginning to impose her own criteria through filters or through other tools, turning ranking then into a dialogue. She still uses AI summaries, but as a scaffold. She reads the summary first as a map, and then opens the full text that she chooses, verifying claims, actively hunts for omitted limitations and contradictory findings. With the concept mapping tool, she critiques the proposed connections as hypothesis rather than adopting them as conclusions. She builds her own map from the interrogation. Both sessions are, let's be honest, faster than unassisted research, but one of them is much more theirs. Again, will this become the norm? Probably not, right? But at least we can scaffold this into our information literacy instruction now as the tools begin to emerge, and we have a chance to guide their implementation. So from ghost to architect. Liaison librarians often cannot control whether AI features are switched on in the databases that we recommend, and non-AI alternatives are vanishing rapidly as platforms integrate APIC tools as standard. Natural language search, AI-assisted search, right? Some vendors offer opt-in models, but implementation is inconsistent. Again, EBSCO is one of the better providers for that. They are offering opt-in rather than opt-out, right? So do you want to use this? Go ahead and go use it rather than, oh, it's already there. Now you're using it. I don't want to, or whatever. Meanwhile, many university policies simply defer the responsibility of checking AI correctness to students and assume that they have the skill to do that. How many times have we seen that? So can librarians become AI literacy educators? Means that we need to know how AI works, and particularly how machine learning algorithms work, how they shape search results, how large language models generate content, predictably, how Gen AI systems create synthetic content. It also demands some pedagogical strategies. Librarians must be empowered to negotiate with vendors, demand transparency about AI functionality, and insist on user choice. Some things we can do right now, we can demand transparency and disclosure. Students have a right to know when AI systems are mediating their research. Librarians must demand full transparency. I'm going to go for a couple more minutes here. The role of AI in shaping research outcomes should never be hidden. Any system that influences search results or source selection must include persistent indicators of AI involvement, at least for now, right? It is essential as the tools develop and they maybe get better at accountability and creating good content. And informed consent in the academic research, so we know, right, what we're using. Another one that I think is really important is preservation of choice. We must insist that students are taught how to conduct research without depending on integrated AI. It's the calculator issue again, right? This means continuing to teach basic information strategies, including, most importantly, Boolean logic, discipline-specific databases, etc. Lastly, we're really good at assessment, so let's keep doing it. Libraries must implement ongoing assessment of AI's impact on student learning, use tracking how students use AI tools, etc. These recommendations are not aspirational. They are a necessary intervention. They are helping us to, review this evolving network and implement transparent, choice-preserving, pedagogically grounded approaches. Some thoughts about future research. I'm not going to go into this too much because I'm running out of time, but we need to observe the network. This is the research I'm doing now, mixed method studies. I'm looking at faculty, but I'm also including students in that. The paper hopefully will be submitted next week, and I'll be showing it at ACRL next year because of the nature of conferences today. Longitudinal analysis. If anyone wants to work with me on projects like that, I think that's really important, and I'd love to. Lastly, institutional. I think this is our call to service. Whether commercially led integration aligns with goals for research, literacy, academic integrity, and student well-being, and what governance structures ethical implementation requires. I think this is probably the most necessary and probably the most difficult, especially for the latter part of that statement. Lastly, this session has demonstrated that AI systems redistribute agency. Rejecting AI integration outright might be impossible. Instead, librarians must advocate for approaches that prioritize student autonomy. Librarians can serve as both AI educators and AI critics. Students need to be taught how to research independently of AI tools with systems that are opt-in rather than the default. So the question, are we ghosts in the machine, ultimately depends on how institutions choose to implement and regulate AI tools. The path forward is not to exercise AI from the library. Obviously, we couldn't exercise Google. There was no reason to. But to intentionally design the human AI composite network to recenter and enhance students' individual agency. And we can do this. This means using the strategies I've outlined or others to make sure that student agency remains central and that we're aware of it, that we're thinking about student agency. AI can be a visible tool, a great tool, when welded by an embodied critical mind. The goal of thoughtful, ethical AI integration then is to ensure that students are not spectral passengers in a system they cannot see, but are the deliberate architects of their own intellectual journeys. So with that, I want to say thank you. Ask for some questions, disagreements, and collaborations. Now is the time.
Thank you so much for that, Quincy. I really felt like I was attending like um a a lecture in a classroom. Like I was
Sorry
sitting
about
there and just
that.
like, oh no, no, I mean that in such a great way, like that I felt like I was in front of a professor who was sharing this great information with me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Um, there's lots of comments, lots of discussions in the chat. If anybody has any questions, you can post that into our Q&A, and then I can make sure that we get that answered. I'm going to go back and just kind of look at some of these chats and maybe hopefully you'll be able to kind of like give some context around this or provide some like just some explanations.
Sure.
So Jenny had mentioned something. She says that she's a law librarian and finds that legal databases have changed so much,
Oh my gosh.
changed to such a degree that without AI, you cannot locate
Yeah.
information within
Yeah.
them. Boolean searching seems unrecognized by the
Oh no.
databases, and even case retrieval is difficult. This takes
Oh,
away agency because you're guided to where the publisher AI kind of wants
yeah.
you to go.
Yep.
And I think this kind of brings me to this idea of like there's question around like transparency around AI vendors, right? And
Hmm.
whether or not it's realistic for us to expect them to be transparent with us. Um, so I guess I'm just kind of throwing it back into the loop of what Jenny had said was just, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that so, we've been at the mercy of these publishers for so long, and we've tried so hard to try to get science to change to an open platform where we're presenting our stuff directly. And AVIX certainly has helped doing that. But geez, when it comes to what you're describing, they adopted a lot of these AI tools really early on. So I'm afraid that they sign contracts with poor early chat platforms and are using those across their databases. Hopefully they'll be forced to um, re-argue those contracts because of the changing models that are happening so rapidly. So I hope that kind of answered your question. But I think that we need to be advocates and we need to voice these concerns. And we need to be also critics where we're testing them and seeing what they're doing. I think that that's also really important, not to accept the voice of the publisher. I'm doing this with Clinical Key right now as they're trying to get the Clinical Key AI tool into our medical databases at UIC.
Great. And so now we have a few questions that popped up, and I had questions of my own, but I'll save myself. I'll save my questions. We have about 4 minutes, so hopefully we can answer some of these
Ooh,
questions.
yeah.
So for those of us who teach undergrads who will be going on to careers outside academia, do you have suggestions for teaching them to search more agentically? I hope I said that right, outside of academic library resources.
Yeah. So what I try to do is I try to teach the process again. So go back to teaching Boolean operators and why we do that. Um, and then I use a technique where I use an older model and I have it generate a literature review, and then we go through and we pick it apart. And it's pretty fun, and students like doing it. The same thing that we used to do with like influencer videos, where you could say like, look, this person is saying this and that, and clearly they're not, right? They're not a doctor of medicine, they're a doctor of nutrition, and they're talking about diabetes management. And so this is problematic because we don't know where they're getting their evidence, right? So that's one way I think is revisiting our ability to teach prompt engineering, which is a silly phrase. I think that we need to come up with something better. Just like, hallucinations was a silly phrase and it wasn't really describing what we're doing. But again, I think that we're really well situated to do that. So find the way that works really well for you and try to act as well as you can in it, but making sure that they're recognizing that these tools are flawed and they're not
Mhm.
the oracle that they're being described as in the media right now.
Thank you for that. So the next question, asking as a law librarian, the legal profession is built on advocacy, persuasion, negotiation, and trust. As AI becomes more capable of drafting arguments and
Mhm.
analyzing cases, how can aspiring lawyers ensure they continue to cultivate the distinctly human skills that clients, courts, and society will always need?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this as a medical librarian. Use evidence to support your conclusions in practice. So pull up that evidence and say this from this legal decision at this time, this is the precedent. No, we do the same thing. From this clinical trial at this time, this is the clinical precedent. And if somebody says, well, that clinical trial was 20 years old, it doesn't matter if it was truthful and we can measure it, right? There's a classic example of this where Harvard did a piece of research, a clinical trial, and it was involved in an inhaler. They didn't go into the paper literature, and there was a piece about this particular drug done in the paper literature that had never been digitized. They didn't access. They went forward with the trial, and somebody died. So real life examples of this happening. I think maybe embracing evidence-based legal practice. Maybe we have a new form of teaching legal education by teaching it from an evidence-based perspective.
Thanks, Quincy. I see that we have lots of legal folks in here, law librarians. So
Awesome.
somebody will coin something and work on a new framework, right? So we
No
have
doubt.
about a minute left. And so I want to make sure that we stay on track. And we do have two questions, but I will read the first question that came first.
Okay.
So how do you suggest using valuable time to teach Boolean if the tools don't
Mm.
recognize the operators and the results work against the search strategies we show in class?
Mm. I don't have a good answer for that right now. I don't think any of us do. I think that showing them the value of why you use controlled vocabularies in databases, and they're diminishing rapidly, right? There's only a few left that use controlled vocabularies in the way we were taught as librarians from the earlier generation. Um, but yeah, I think showing them the value of it and why we do it and showing them conceptually, if you've stopped using the Venn diagram, go back to the Venn diagram so they see what or really means. I don't think that most users understand what or means when we're using it in that way. So I think going back to the Venn diagrams and then showing the difference between a controlled vocabulary database search and a Google search and the amount of noise that you get versus the amount of precision and recall you get from controlled vocabulary searches. So again, coming back to the reason why we do this, I use the old description as you walk into a library, you see a subject category, and within that you see smaller categories. And that's what controlled vocabularies do, and they help people to understand that.
Thanks, Quincy. And just lastly, I think this is more just a comment
Mhm.
from Rachel and
Mhm.
just said, I just want to express my appreciation for the anthropological take on how the tools are impacting our access to our whole sphere of information and our
Mhm.
ability to train other people to access and use the information we need. So, yeah.
We're such interdisciplinary folks, librarians are. So, embrace those other disciplines that you loved and use them within our sphere. I mean, when I began thinking about agency, the librarian in me immediately went to information seeking. And I realized, wow, this is what's happening, or at least this is what Hanson's theory argues is happening. And I like to test it better, and that data will emerge over the next year or so.
Alrighty, so that brings us over about a minute. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending our wonderful session. And thank you so much, Quincy, for giving such a wonderful talk. I have my own questions, and I probably will email them to you much
Yeah,
later
please do.
on.
Anybody,
Uh,
please do.
but for everybody else, please stick around. We still have a few sessions for the rest of the day. We hope you guys have a wonderful time at the Gale conference. And yeah, have a good one, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. There's my emails, and have a great rest of your day.